Before we start the program, I would like to give you some housekeeping information. First, we encourage attendees to use the computer audio feature of this webinar. During the program, should you experience any audio interference, such as static, intermittent audio due to a busy network, you can use the optional phone connection which is indicated on your screen below the webinar slide player. When using the phone for audio, mute the computer audio by clicking the speaker icon in the bottom right corner of the webinar slide player. Do not exit the webinar as your online attendance is being timed, and disconnecting from the webinar before the end of the program will prevent you from receiving CLE credit. Second, we will have a live Q&A session during the last 10 minutes of the program. You may submit questions at any time during the program using the Q&A function in the webinar interface. After the program, you can use the post-program question form to send program-related questions to the program's faculty. The post-program question form can be accessed from the program attendee page. Use the link provided in the confirmation email you received for the program to get there. Do you have an idea for the ABA or an ABA program? We would like to hear it. Enter ambar.org/topic suggestion and fill out this simple form. Welcome to Making a Virtual Connection, Ensuring an Open and Productive Attorney-Client Relationship While Remote, sponsored by the ABA Commission on Immigration. If you are seeking CLE credit, you must attend the entire program. Partial credit is not available. Please click on all the participation verification alerts during the program to confirm your attendance. Immediately after the program ends, a link to complete the certification process will appear. Please complete the evaluation and the CLE affidavit, providing your bar information as requested. Once the completed form is submitted and your attendance is verified, your certificates will be emailed to you. Moderating the program today is Emily McCabe. Emily is a senior staff attorney for the Family Group Legal Orientation Program in the American Bar Association's Commission on Immigration. Prior to being at CIO, Emily worked for 5 years as an immigration attorney at Northern Virginia Family Service, representing mostly unaccompanied minors, asylum seekers, and survivors of trafficking and criminal activity. Emily, please proceed with today's program.
Thank you so much, Donna. Good afternoon or good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. It is my pleasure to welcome you, and I would like to briefly introduce today's panel. Michelle Jacobson, Karina Ramos, and Sarah Burrows. Michelle Jacobson is a partner in the Chicago office of Fragaman, Del Rey, Bernson, and Lowy, and has practiced immigration law for nearly 20 years. Michelle provides strategic immigration representation and innovative success-driven solutions to companies, including startups and Fortune 500 companies. Michelle currently serves on the advisory committee of the American Bar Association's Commission on Immigration and on the board of directors for the Chinese American Service League. Karina Ramos is a managing attorney in the Children's Representation Project of the Immigration Defenders Law Center. She oversees staff attorneys in their provision of representation to detained, unaccompanied children, and refugee minors. Prior to joining IMDEF, Karina provided pro bono legal support to the South Texas Pro Bono Asylum Representation Project and the South Texas Family Residential Center in Dilley, Texas. And Sarah Burrows is the Director of Pro Bono and Partnerships at HIAS. Sarah oversees HIAS's Pro Bono Attorney Network and is responsible for the development of new projects and pro bono opportunities to serve refugees, asylum seekers, and forcibly displaced persons. Prior to joining HIAS, Sarah was the Director of Pro Bono at the Brooklyn Bar Association Volunteer Lawyers Project. And now I'm going to pass it over to Michelle to tell us a little bit about her favorite programs to use with clients while working remotely.
Thanks, Emily. I would say in the last 2 years, we've definitely become very adept at all the video platforms available. I would say my favorite one has been WebEx, only insofar as my firm decided to use WebEx as our primary platform for all our representations, which has been challenging and both convenient at the same time. When I look back to where I was 2 years ago, I was definitely the person who would opt to dial in by phone versus using anything on a video. So I've definitely gotten much better at it, and WebEx definitely has a lot of cool features to collaborate with your clients and be able to share documents real time, use a whiteboard. There's a lot of fun options to chat, of course, and be able to share documents real time. So that's definitely our preferred method of communication. And I will turn it over to Karina.
Morning, good afternoon, everybody. To echo Michelle, yes, the more comfortable I'm getting with certain video technology, the better I feel. But my preferred platform is still the phone. A lot of my clients really don't have access to Wi-Fi computers. The idea of teaching some of them WebEx is just overwhelming for both of us, or Teams. So we do use, I work with a lot of children, so we use Zoom a lot. That's because our kids know Zoom because they've been learning from home for the past 2 years. And so they're already familiar with that platform. So it's easier to sort of try to go with Zoom. Most of our kids or adults love WhatsApp. So that's our second sort of platform that we use the most. They seem to all have it. They're familiar with it. We get very quick responses, especially when it comes to kids. You text them and they text you back in 30 seconds, so it's really beautiful. But those are like our preferred methods here. Sarah?
Thanks so much. Karina, thank you for bringing up the phone because I think that we forget that the phone exists now, and sometimes it is the best and most appropriate platform and way to communicate. So yes, absolutely, still like the phone. I agree. Zoom has been my favorite in terms of needing to be on video, largely because it is what is available and accessible to me at my organization. But also I find it really user-friendly, easy to teach people how to use, and has all of the screen sharing and other features that can make it easy to run virtual meetings. I agree, WhatsApp has been a really important way to communicate with clients. I think it's maybe the most common way that clients like to communicate is through WhatsApp. And then I would also just add that we utilize SharePoint, which can be an easy way to create and share documents, both with clients, but also in my role with pro bono attorneys, a little bit more securely than just via email. And I'll turn it back to Emily.
Great. Thank you. And thank you all for sharing your favorite platforms. And now we can dive into some discussion questions. The first one is, in your experience, what are the major challenges and benefits to virtual client meetings as opposed to in-person client meetings? Karina, do you mind starting us off?
Sure. I think that this is sort of like why we're having this panel discussion. We could talk about it now and then hear all of the good and bad, and then discuss it again at the end. But the good, we are able to connect with clients without disrupting their lives so much, right? Especially our clients are limited by distance, school, work. Both the kids have to leave school, the adults who have to bring them to the office have to miss work. Those are real considerations. So definitely the virtual world has helped us adapt to their schedules and be less disruptive. We are also, because you feel they're a little bit less disruptive, they don't have to leave their home at 1 o'clock to make it 2 hours to downtown where our office is, and you feel that you have to maximize the amount of time that they're here because they made it all the way here, and you're not going to be able to see them for a while. So you have these intakes that could go on for 3 hours, which are exhausting for both us and the clients. And so I believe that one of the benefits of the virtual meetings is that you can have more of them, maybe shorter ones. You can have 2 or 3, and it doesn't feel like you're imposing that much. So there's definitely a lot of wonderful things to the virtual meetings. We believe best practice is to meet with your clients in person, right? I don't think that there really is an alternative. So the challenges are the communities that we work for, that we work with, a lot of them have experienced a lot of trauma, right? Very, very traumatic experiences. And so there is a level of disconnect when you're not meeting with your client in person. You can't comfort them when they're in distress, when they're going through something in their story that you really need to sort of be able to let them know that you understand, that you feel for them, that you can take a break. It's different over the computer, so that's difficult. One of the things that we have found that I didn't anticipate is I don't know how quite to phrase this. There is not a lack of importance, but they're not as engaged with you because they're not in your office. They're not walking with you to court to sit in front of a judge. And so there's a sense of like, maybe I'll go see you, maybe I won't. Like they don't understand how serious their case is. There's a disconnect there when everything is virtual, and they're no longer coming with us to court because now they're not even appearing with us, right? Presence is waived of most of our clients in the immigration world, and we're appearing for them, so that's very problematic as well. And when we are talking with children especially, they kind of seem to wander off the screen sometimes, and you can't bring them back. It's very difficult. I usually like to have a box with toys and crayons and colors and stress balls, and we're just kind of hanging out, and there's something that you can't do in engaging with them at another level. It's sort of like they appear on the screen and you're kind of getting ready to go into the questions. And so that is, I find some of the negatives of the virtual meetings with clients.
Thank you for that. Sarah, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think I would just add one quick benefit from HIAS and our pro bono program's perspective. The ability to work with clients remotely does put us in a position to be able to serve clients that we otherwise wouldn't have access to. We're able to develop some pro bono projects, particularly case types or particular projects where it is okay to really do the majority of the representation remotely. I completely agree with Karina that best practice is to meet in person, but there are some straightforward applications, some types of projects where the meetings really can happen remote throughout the representation. And because we're able to do this, we are able to connect pro bono attorneys with clients who don't live in the same place. We're able to work with clients who are outside of the normal jurisdictions that we serve. And we're really able to be a little bit more creative and reach broader networks, both on the pro bono attorney side and on the client side, because of our ability to do a lot of the work remotely.
I would definitely echo that. We have a lot of clients that live out of the city of Chicago, and so it's very inconvenient for them to meet us downtown. There's parking involved. The parking costs a lot of money, especially for someone who doesn't live in the city. So having the convenience factor, and I think I even find myself to be a little bit more flexible to take on a virtual representation because I have that option to do it after hours or earlier in the morning, depending on their schedule.
Thank you. And what do you do to set expectations with clients to help ensure they understand what the representation will actually look like while being remote? Sarah, do you mind starting us?
Sure. Yeah, I have a couple thoughts on this. I think the first thing is to really make sure that the client understands the why. Why are we utilizing a remote or hybrid model for this particular case? So for example, from HIAS's perspective, as I mentioned, we now work with volunteer attorneys from all over the country. So we may want to let the client know, for your particular case, we're going to assign you an attorney that may not live in the same city as you. And so working with them remotely will allow them to represent you in a case where we might not otherwise have been able to help. We also might want to explain to clients that our lawyers are not allowed into the office every day. That's still the case with HIAS. I know it's still the case with a lot of the pro bono attorneys that we work with. They just might not be able to access a physical space Monday through Friday. And so it may be necessary for some meetings to happen virtually, just so the meetings happen and happen when they need to. Again, I think this has already been noted, but the ability to meet remotely creates flexibility, which can be really important. I also think it's important to explain from the top, not just the why, but also why it's okay that the representation is going to be virtual. Maybe explaining that the case doesn't require any in-person appearances. For certain types of immigration cases, for example, temporary protected status, there may not be a court appearance, there may not be an interview. So really, it's perfectly okay for the representation to happen remote if the client's comfortable doing that. And explaining that, I think, is really helpful. Explaining that, again, it's going to be easier for them to meet with their lawyer. And then also explaining that when the representation happens virtually, it doesn't change any of the rules. It doesn't change attorney-client privilege. It doesn't impact the legal case, that everything will proceed as it would in person. It's just going to be remote. And again, emphasizing that and make sure the clients realize that they're not going to be disadvantaged. And I should note, if we think they will be disadvantaged, that maybe that's the type of case that shouldn't be done remotely. And then I think making sure to confirm that the client understands what the virtual representation will look like, including letting them know when they might need to be in person somewhere, if that's going to be the case. Making sure that they have the tools and resources necessary, again, from the very beginning of a representation or from the first interaction. Maybe doing an initial intake or conversation over Zoom to make sure that the client is comfortable using it. Maybe making sure to emphasize a conversation about preferred methods of communication from the top, what their work schedule is, what their access to technology is, what their access is to internet, to make sure that they really have a place to meet virtually, that they have the necessary privacy, and that this is a model that actually will work for them. And then again, always being mindful of what clients might not be well served in this model, either because of the type of case that they have, or because they just, don't have the tools or what they need on their end to do it productively. And then just a final thought, because I manage a pro bono program, for me, it's also really important to set these same expectations for any pro bono attorney who's going to take on a case that happens virtually, making sure they understand that remote doesn't mean not professional, making sure they understand the importance of having their camera on. And we'll talk more about this later on, but really that they have the tools they need to properly support the clients virtually as well. And I think I'll stop there and let the rest of the panelists add any additional thoughts.
Michelle, any additional thoughts?
I mean, I would definitely echo everything you've just said, Sarah, because that's so much of what we do ahead of time, is have that phone conversation before we meet, I would say, and then have that conversation to discuss, what we're looking for in terms of the representation, how much more I think it's meaningful for everyone involved to have the video representation in lieu of in person, if for whatever reason we're not able to do the in-person meeting. The opportunities there to sort of connect with them can be challenging, but we always try to do that phone call ahead of time so that we can discuss with the individuals as far as the opportunities to log on via WebEx and having the internet at their disposal, explaining to them that it's really important that they not be, at a break room at work, for example, and we'll be sharing a lot of personal confidential information, especially if there's a trauma case involved. We're very likely not going to cover much if they're going to be in a public workspace where everyone can hear their stories, and certainly even just sharing date of birth and their PII, as we call it, their personal information. That's definitely critical for us not to have anyone else in the room. And certainly this has happened where we've had people kind of come by and you kind of pause and say, did you know there was someone who was right behind you who had just walked by? So having that initial conversation at the beginning to talk about, what to expect in that virtual representation is important. And it also helps clear the way for any potential hurdles. If they are not able to connect for whatever reason, we can always reschedule for a date that they can connect and have access to Wi-Fi, have access to the information so that they can see in the video format, because we're sharing the documents, we're preparing the forms in front of them, that they be able to be on camera, not only to connect with you, but to also be able to also share information on their end.
Okay. And Karina, do you have anything to add?
I would just, echo everything they said. I think that when you do a virtual intake or a meeting with a client virtually, it has to work for everybody, both for the lawyer and the client. And you have to be able to change gears. If there are situations, I would say the majority of my clients, young kids, love it. They love just being on their phone and video, and it's easy for them, and they engage even better sometimes than they do in person. But there are some clients that just is not going to work for. They just cannot express themselves They do live in situations where there is no privacy. They can't share fully what they need to tell you. So you can't fully represent them without truly knowing their story. So I think being able to change gears and deciding, you know what, we're going to have to meet in person somehow. We're going to have to make this work. We can't do it virtually, and just being able to do that if you need to for your clients.
Great, thank you. And what methods do you use to try and ensure your clients are in a safe, private, and quiet space to talk? I know we kind of started into this conversation, but Michelle, do you mind leading us in?
So yeah, so that initial phone call is probably the first step in making sure that they know that the expectation in our video meeting is that they be in a quiet spot. So confirming that ahead of time. And sometimes it doesn't happen. And there's things, as Karina mentioned, there may be circumstances that are outside of their control. They really can't find that quiet spot. So we'll discuss options if need be. So if they're having issues with the internet that day, we can discuss rescheduling. If there's another day and time they can do this. We can also look at meeting in person now that we can, although we still have the same challenges in that I am not in the office except for 2 days a week. So even logistically, it still becomes challenging on all ends to try to coordinate that in-person meeting. But all the same, I think having that phone call in the beginning to make sure that they know to be in that quiet spot and have that privacy is important.
And Sarah, anything to add?
Yeah, I completely agree with everything about the expectation setting. I know that we're going to talk a little bit more about trauma-informed lawyering in a little bit, but I would just add to the importance of being thoughtful about when and how you schedule the meetings and really including the client in that conversation. I think for lawyers, it can sometimes be tempting to say, I have an hour on Tuesday for a meeting. But a lot of times our clients have children at home or work schedules. And just like when we're scheduling a meeting in person, we want to be mindful of a time that works not just for their schedule, but also works best for them in their lives. And we should do the same when we're scheduling meetings virtually. And I think that really sets clients up for success. An example I often like to give is a client who worked a night shift, and his lawyers often would schedule his client meeting first thing in the morning, 9:30, 10 a.m. And he would always be late and would be exhausted. And when they finally figured out that although he was free at that time, he was coming straight from work essentially, they realized that, that wasn't really a good time and they weren't setting him up for success in scheduling the meetings then, but scheduling them later in the day when he had a chance to sleep was much better. And I think we should think the same way virtually. When are your children in school? When do you have childcare? When do you have time to yourself? And that way, when the meeting actually happens, it's more likely they are going to be in a safe, private, and quiet space because they've thought about it too on their end ahead of time.
Karina, any additional thoughts?
No, I think they covered it very well. Yeah, definitely take them into account when planning those meetings.
I was just going to say, I think I'm more generous with my pro bono clients as far as my flexibility on time than I am for my paying clients. I'm far more likely to suggest a off hours meeting or a weekend meeting before I will suggest that to my paying clients.
Yes. And just to add to that point too, Michelle, sorry, go ahead. Sorry, I know we have a lag. I was just going to say, just to add to that point too, being flexible also doesn't necessarily mean the meetings need to be, after hours or on the weekend. You can still have the meeting during regular business hours and be mindful of times of day that work best for the client. It can be a bit of a compromise.
And in the same vein, what methods do you use to try and limit distractions for your clients? Karina, do you mind starting us off?
Yeah, so it sort of flows into the next topic, right? We do have to be mindful. We're talking about taking them into account and what works best for them. However, before COVID, I was having clients miss school if that's what needed to happen because I needed them here for 4 hours, right? So there was missing of school, there was people not going to work, and so it's okay to do that, I believe, just because it's virtually. I think that's part of taking into consideration how to limit distractions. And if it happens that your kid or your client has to stay home and not go to work or school that day because that's when the house is quiet, and the kids are out of, the younger kids are in school, or people are not in the house, and that's when you do it. I also think that that's okay. I think that the way we try to limit distractions when we're interviewing the client or having a meeting with them is to really check in with them, especially regularly, for understanding, to make sure that they're on the same page with you, because sometimes the screen just becomes a blur and they're kind of listening but not fully engaging. So definitely trying to check in and treat the virtual meeting like a real meeting. The client may need to go to the restroom. The client may need water. The client may need to get up and stretch. And sometimes I think we sit there and we just want to power through. And we should really be considering everything, because if you need to go to the restroom, you are not focusing, right? And you may not want to interrupt your lawyer. And so it's important, I think, to make sure that they're comfortable, just like if they were in your office, and give them the opportunity to, before the meeting, express when they need to get up and do whatever they need to do for a minute and take a breather so that they can focus and be present with you. I think that's important.
Thank you. And Michelle, anything to add?
No, I would say, definitely noticing that we need to be realistic as far as our own expectations for how much we can accomplish in a virtual meeting. I would say always be prepared that you may end up doing more sessions than you anticipated because of these distractions, and trying to sort of capture the individual at their best, right? So they're not coming off a 16-hour shift and they're able to converse and be ready to provide you information. But all the same, I think we find ourselves having to do a lot more small talk to get comfortable. And then as a result, I think that we're finding that multiple sessions are necessary in order to be able to get all the information you need.
Sarah, any additional thoughts?
Yeah, I think I would just add to, again, particularly since I'm used to sort of talking pro bono attorneys through this, and what I might say to them is also, and maybe this goes without saying, but also limiting distractions for yourself. I think it's much easier to be engaged with people on Zoom if you feel their engagement back at you, and it can be easy to be looking at your phone or taking notes even, or looking away from the camera, or if you're two people in the Zoom, maybe you're having a side conversation. So I think, just remembering to do your best to be looking at the camera too. Again, screen on, be mindful of any background noises or your own background. If you're in an office and there's people behind you, that might be distracting. And then if you do need to take notes, or you're going to be looking away from the camera, explain to the client why you're doing that, so they feel connected to you as well, and that might help keep them more engaged and less distracted as well.
Great, thank you. And Sarah, you had alluded to this earlier, but has trauma-informed lawyering become more difficult or easier to implement while remote? And what issues should an advocate consider to ensure that they are bringing a trauma-informed approach to the representation?
Thanks. And this is such an important question. I think all of us have already alluded to the fact that we're going to be touching upon this. And I think everything we've already been talking about goes to this question. I don't think it's more difficult or easier. I think being mindful of bringing trauma-informed practices is always important. And I think when you're bringing it to a virtual meeting versus an in-person meeting, it just looks different. But I think it always comes down to, figuring out how to create trust and how to break down the power dynamic a little bit between yourself and the client, so that the client feels empowered, and so that the client understands that they are part of a team working towards their goals, and so that the client is comfortable opening up and telling their story. And so I think, continuing to talk about how to make sure the client has a sense of control in the virtual meeting and feels like they're part of the team. Again, we already mentioned a lot of this, but making sure the client feels comfortable using the platform. If they feel insecure in the platform, they're going to feel insecure in the meeting. Making sure you're on video, making sure that you're mindful about who else is present in the virtual space. If you're working on with a team of attorneys, or there's a paralegal or an interpreter in the virtual meeting, making sure that they're introduced and that their role is understood by the client, just like you would in an in-person meeting, so that the client understands who is there and why they're there. Consider renaming people in the virtual room and including their name and their role so the client really can see and has an understanding of everybody. Keep muted when not talking, so to avoid background noise. Little tricks like if you're in an in-person meeting, you always want to be mindful about not interrupting the client while they're speaking, giving them a chance to get their story out or answer the questions. That can be harder in a virtual space. So consider using a raise hand function to show the client that you have a question, or coming up with other tricks to make sure that you don't interrupt the client and the client knows the rules, quote unquote, of the way that you're interacting. And just remember that because the meeting is virtual doesn't mean it's any easier for the client to be on time. So we've already talked about how to set them up for success. But I think really the short of it is use all of those same tricks that you have in an in-person meeting and just tweak them to make them appropriate for a virtual meeting.
Thank you. And Karina, any additional thoughts?
Yeah, that was excellent, Sarah. I agree with everything she said. I think that for me, especially, this is the hardest part about the virtual meetings is that it's not maybe harder, but it is different to try to be present with your client. We usually get a little bit of background information on our clients before we initially meet with them. And so I don't want to be the seventh adult asking my child, to tell me what happened again, right? So I think a consistent thread has been these meetings sometimes take more than one meeting, right? And if I know that my client has gone through something traumatic, I may not be asking those questions at the very first meeting. It's like, hi, this is my name. What do you like to do? And just sort of like get them to trust you as best they can before you go into those heavy questions so that you're not re-traumatizing your client unnecessarily, having had some background and sort of working the rapport and the trust with the clients a little bit so that when they do share, they share everything and they feel comfortable that they're sharing with somebody that they can trust.
And anything to add, Michelle?
I would just add, as far as the expectations, again, really where we are meeting the individuals for the first time, we really work at the small talk a little bit more than we have been in an in-person setting. That's definitely very true right now, that it's not the same. And I say this a lot, that it's, especially in the pro bono context, those pro bono representations to me have always been far more meaningful, far more impactful, mainly because I become personally attached to many of my clients, and as a result of knowing them and they know me, and so I find myself almost oversharing sometimes in an effort to get them to connect with me in a virtual context, probably a little bit more than I do when we're meeting in person. And really just so we can get that small talk going, you may find yourself connecting with them in a different level and than you would have otherwise had you just met them for the first time in a clinic capacity in person.
And we just got a great question from somebody in the audience. Would you recommend having vulnerable clients appear with social workers or support personnel to help communicate information and expectations?
I can take a first try at this. I think it really depends. There's obviously attorney-client issues that you would need to keep in mind. I think it depends on if you're working with a child, with a grown-up, what other needs they have. I think that if the social worker made an initial connection or is at your organization or somebody the client is really, really comfortable with, that might be a good way to do a first meeting where maybe you don't cover much information about their case, but really just get to know each other and keep it very casual, maybe just sign the retainer or whatever it is, just to get them more comfortable, and then move towards doing meetings with them without that person present. But again, I think it depends on the client and the need, but I think that that's a creative way to build some trust early on if appropriate.
Okay, great. And Michelle, you had kind of started touching on this, but do you have any tips or tricks to recreating the personal connections that are often formed during in-person meetings, like the small talk and all that sort of stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I usually consider myself a pretty chatty person, and so I think we're inevitably always talking about the weather. COVID is always a topic that comes up at first glance, so that just talk about COVID. We have our little list of questions that we start asking about family, you know, and where they're from and things of that nature. And I think we connect a little bit more culturally. I think speaking Spanish to each other, that helps provide that connection a bit more. But again, I think from my standpoint, that initial meeting is oftentimes just a lot of small talk and not a lot of substance communicated. So we often just try to keep it short and just do an introductory meeting and just kind of connect that way, and then plan to have more of a deep dive in having that all that information ahead of you, so you can start preparing the documents and preparing the affidavit. So then that's when I think the virtual offerings that we have are huge for us, because I can type the narrative in while they're talking, and they can see on the screen what exactly I'm typing, and so it helps sort of facilitate the information gathering. And I think both parties really then see exactly what we're doing in terms of framing the application.
And Karina, any additional thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. Engaging them when they're seeing what you're typing and the work that you're doing gives importance to what they're saying, right? I like to show them my office, right? I move the computer around, and this is where I sit, and this is where I keep my files, and sort of just trying to let them see my world a little bit. And it's also a way to sort of make sure they're kind of alone sometimes, like, oh, show me where you are, and and so that's part of the engaging, I think. And like I said, a lot of, especially the children, I find truly thrive on this platform, on this virtual world. It's sort of like their world, and they feel very comfortable with it. And so that's definitely a plus. Yeah.
And how do you manage interpreters or maybe translators for text messages while connecting with clients virtually? Karina, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, so you meet your clients where they are. We have clients who have access to all the tech, who have computers, and especially the children that we represent that are still under the care of the Office of Refugee and Resettlement, ORR. They have access to everything, right? So for them, we like to use a few platforms, but Genie is one of the ones that we really enjoy. And you send Genie interpreter a link, and you send the shelter a link, and then the three of you just magically pop up at the same time in this room, and it just kind of works, not flawlessly, but it works most of the time. So that's what we do for those types of cases. The majority of my clients, we're good old phone, right? We call the client, and then we conference in the interpreter, whatever service we're using. And so we're not seeing each other. We have 3 people on the phone, and there's a lot of tech issues all the time. We can't hear somebody, we can't hear somebody else. It now has made unfortunately, your intake at least twice as long, right? Or your meeting twice as long. So also important with interpreters, I like to really have more than one session. Sometimes you have a client who speaks a language that is difficult to find an interpreter for, and so you may just have to power through, right? Because you don't want to take the chance of not being able to schedule this interpreter again, and you have to get to some questions quickly. But I like with interpretation to at least do a couple sessions so that we don't exhaust the client. But the majority, I would say, is just conference calling in the interpreter, because that's the easiest way for my clients to be able to connect with me and the interpreter. Yeah, and translator to text, I don't know, maybe my colleagues have some comments on that, because I haven't used that.
Same. I think everyone from our office is either able to speak the language, or I haven't outsourced that function.
Yeah. And Sarah, any additional thoughts?
Yeah, I would just add a lot of our pro bono attorneys do need to use interpreters for the client meeting, and I always remind them to make sure the interpreter understands their role, that the interpreter understands that they're there to facilitate the conversation between the attorney and the client. And so, little things like referring to the client by their name and speaking directly to the client so that the client speaks back, not through the interpreter, but just with the interpreter's facilitation. Can be really helpful. And, chatting with the interpreter beforehand to make sure you know how long of sentences to speak in, that you can, come up with a plan if they need you to slow down, or you can speed up so that it goes a little bit more smoothly. If you are on camera, remembering again to do your best to make it clear that you are speaking directly to the client, not to the interpreter. And then I think the last thing I would note is just making sure to explain to the client, if it's in phone or virtual, who the interpreter is and what their role is and why they're joining and how they're going to help.
And how do you manage, we talked about this a little bit, how do you manage document sharing, such as document collection and getting client signatures? Sarah, do you mind starting us off?
Sure. I'd love to hear from the other panelists on this one as well, because I'm always looking for new ideas to make this smoother. We use SharePoint. I can create shareable folders and send a link that clients can use to drop documents into, which can be helpful. That's also often how we share documents between us and pro bono attorneys. Docusign is obviously a really helpful tool that's pretty easy to use. Sometimes it really is just mailing the pages you need signed directly to the client with a pre-stamped, pre-addressed return envelope and instructions, and just letting them sign back. In immigration, we've been a little bit lucky that USCIS has been taking duplicated original signatures since the pandemic started, which means we don't necessarily need the original back in time to file. So mailing a document for them to sign, and then just telling them that they can scan it and send it and email it back signed, just the signature page, is also a workaround. In terms of sharing documents, sometimes you don't need the document in hand, and just sharing your screen and having the client pull it up is a way to see what's going on. And then obviously, again, to talk about simplifying things and just kind of going back to simpler times, that's a good opportunity to meet in person. If you need documents signed, maybe that's when you do your in-person meeting. It can be short, you can be flexible, you can have a clear goal and meet in person and sign the documents there.
And Karina, anything to add?
Yes. So our office is trying to get to that a little bit as a way to re-engage with the clients. It's instead of mailing out that packet, because we do most of it's snail mail. But we're trying to figure out, even if it's a very short, brief meeting, to have a client come in and sign those documents in person. I would say that the way I share most documents with my clients, or let me rephrase that they share with me when I need a document, is WhatsApp. They will take a picture of it and they will just send it to me. And that's how I can at least see what the document is or what they got in the mail, but that's the most popular one for them. Email as well, but mostly it's snail mail. We will send out things with instructions, self-addressed stamp, a little post-it with instructions and a little arrow about where to sign, and then they just send it back. That is the most popular way that we share documents.
And Michelle, anything to add?
I would echo what Sarah said about the USCIS accepting the scanned signatures has been huge for us as a practice. Yeah. I hope it never goes away. I would say the convenience factor is appealing for all of us who practice in the space day in and day out. But it also acknowledging what Karina said, that not everyone has access to a scanner. So we definitely have seen the situations where snail mail is the only option, and sending them the return label already ready to go is convenient for a number of reasons, just to ensure that they send it in a secure fashion. We often give it to them in a FedEx envelope so they could just prop it into a FedEx place and drop it off without having to pay additional postage. But obviously, I think FedEx, as we all know, rising costs, supply chain issues, it's been not great from an expense perspective, but where we definitely need to rely on it, it's been there. Otherwise, I think from a sharing documents perspective, if we're not doing it real time through our WebEx platform, we have a number of alternatives. Our secure client portal is one way to facilitate the sharing of documents. And we also have Excellion, which is another file share site similar to SharePoint and Google Drive and things of that nature, where you can drop the documents in a shared folder and people can access it. So it's always there for them to see.
Great. And just a couple questions from the audience related to this topic. Has anyone been successful with using apps like HelloSign with clients?
I'm not familiar with that.
Do you recommend using a platform that the client uses casually, such as WhatsApp, to keep them comfortable, or does that encourage the client to take meetings less seriously, in your experience?
I'll go first on this one, because my firm is discouraging of, not that we can't text and chat. We can definitely do that to set up meetings and just converse, but not with respect to sharing documents and facilitating, substantive information that's being transmitted. We want to protect not only confidentiality, but we want to protect privilege. So we definitely want to ensure that we're providing the information and that they in turn are conveying the information in a secure fashion. So if we're not using email, then we need to make sure that if we're transmitting documents on our end, then we're using one of these secured sites that I mentioned. But otherwise, the chatting, it's just for informal, let's set up a meeting.
Any additional thoughts?
We do, I agree. We do have like a firm WhatsApp. We have like a firm Facebook. So we try to limit, communications through those portals. They do, I don't know that they take it less seriously, but they do sometimes will, message you on a Saturday at 7 a.m. with something, right? So maybe there's a little bit of, it helps a little bit because they are feeling comfortable with you, but they could take advantage of it a little bit. So yes, I agree. You have to be very careful. Sometimes to get information from them, that is just the easiest way. But we try not to share. We don't reciprocate with documents through those applications, right? But yes, I think that's a good question. I see it both ways. I think it's helpful. It does establish that we know what those apps are, especially with the young kids. And it's easy. It's just easy for them to do it that way. And sometimes that's all you have. But yes, that's a good question. I think both things.
Yeah, I think I would just add to, oh, sorry, Emily.
Go ahead.
I was just going to add to go back to the, trauma-informed question, that a big piece of this is, checking in with your client and seeing what's working and what isn't for them. So if you're working with a kid, for example, and you find that you're on WhatsApp, they do seem really distracted, maybe that's a good thing to troubleshoot. Oh, maybe this feels too much like fun. Maybe if I try a different platform that feels like school, they'll be more likely to take it seriously. A lot of this is, looking for cues from our clients and switching up our approach based on their individual needs. So I think that's a really good question and something to be mindful of, and maybe something to experiment with if it's not working. It might be a good trick to try.
Great, thank you. And how do you troubleshoot tech issues with clients? Michelle, do you mind starting us off?
So I have the good fortune of having an IT department that can help facilitate someone's unable to join our WebEx. So I understand that many of us may not have that luxury. So in many respects, I find myself Googling features, finding out what new things are available in the WebEx, and that's how I found out about the whiteboard option. So there's definitely a lot on there in terms of Google searches and in YouTube content. So there's always that option as well for anyone who's interested in finding out what more can your application do than the traditional WebEx video context.
And Sarah, any thoughts?
Yeah, I would just add, our clients have been living in our post-pandemic world as long as we have been. So I think that, they, for the most part, also have gotten used to this world. So I don't know if the rest of the panelists agree, but I think I've seen fewer and fewer instances of clients sort of never having engaged with Zoom before, for example. Obviously, if there are tech issues or SharePoint can be more tricky or things like that. So talking them through it, or reverting to old-fashioned snail mail or things like that where necessary.
Yeah, I think that we always can revert to the phone. And usually if we're just talking to a client, we have a meeting, we can always try again, right? The biggest issues I have are when my clients have to be in court virtually with me. And so that we sort of practice. We download the app, we sort of do a lot of things beforehand. And even then, I have found, at least in our jurisdictions, both with immigration and state court, we always have the option of calling in. So there's judges who like to see our faces, but there's always like a phone number usually that we can call. But the way I try to resolve those issues when time allows, is we practice before, especially when it's in court and we really need to be there and don't want to have any issues. We just practice, and yeah, our clients are very techy and they're very savvy, and sometimes they know these things better than we do. So it's worked out okay, I think.
Great, thank you. And have you encountered any issues or challenges regarding your ethical obligations while representing clients remotely? Karina, do you mind starting us off?
Sure. I mean, I think we've already talked about it a little bit. For a lot of my clients, they don't have computers. They don't even have a phone, right? The family is sharing a phone, and so you have to wait till the person with the phone comes home from work to try to schedule an appointment. So the biggest issue that we've had is confidentiality, and privacy. You cannot control the environment where you're intaking your client or having an interview with them if they're not in your office. And so it's hard to know who's in the room. It's hard to know if they have something to share with you, and they don't feel comfortable because there's somebody who could hear what they want to share. A lot of our clients went through things that nobody, even in the families that they live with, know that they went through. And so confidentiality is a huge deal for us. That's the biggest concern that we have, both the attorney-client privilege and also being concerned that you're not getting the full story from your client because they don't feel that they can tell you everything given where they are. And so that's a problem. That is the biggest concern that we deal with here. I don't know about my colleagues, but that's our biggest concern.
Michelle, anything to add?
I was just going to say, I think we addressed this a bit earlier where we were talking about multi-generational families and having so many people in the house where privacy is not really an option. And in those situations, as much as you try to minimize that type of distraction, but also that type of, I don't want to call it interference, but that type of presence, oftentimes if you're not able to meet in person and you're having to sort of discuss with other individuals around, I'll get consent from them that are they okay with the fact that a family member will be present or is kind of lingering in the background, and that are they okay to continue given what we know about the situation, in order for them to understand, well, one, that I'm trying to protect their confidentiality, and two, that they understand that this is the serious nature of the representation. I don't want them to feel as though they have no options.
And Sarah, any additional thoughts?
No, I think that was a great summary, and agree that that's certainly the biggest issue is preserving confidentiality and really figuring out how to make sure that that nobody else is in the room and that the client has every opportunity to tell you what they need to tell you, privately.
Great. And now that we have 5-10 minutes left, I think we can go over and take some questions from the audience. One of the first questions is, have any of you used any scheduling apps that allow clients to schedule appointments?
I have one. We've been using Calendly. It's CALENDLY.com. it provides a link to sign up in advance if you want to do a meeting, and it provides syncage with your calendar, so you can basically set the times and dates that you're available.
I have not
I have
used any of
not.
those. That's yeah. Go ahead, Karina.
Oh, yeah, I was just saying, I have not. I feel right now our schedules are so unpredictable that I haven't looked into something like that. But I do like the agency that gives the clients. That's something I think that we should look into for sure, but not yet.
Yeah, I was just going to add, I agree. I haven't. It sounds very cool, but the thought of other people being able to put more meetings on my calendar makes me I don't know if I'm ready for that. So.
I mean, you definitely block your dates and times that you want to have them scheduled, so you do have control. But I agree. I mean, I think the initial notion of someone else going in and adding more things to your calendar, which already happens in my office, by the way, so I already feel like I don't have control over my own calendar. But all the same, I think it goes back to our earlier comments about how far we've come in the last 2 years from where I used to be in managing my day in, day out to where we are now.
Great. And do you have any tips on document sharing with clients who are illiterate or low proficiency in reading/writing?
Someone asked me the other day about someone who was not able to, was visually impaired. And I thought that was fascinating because I had never encountered that before. Unfortunately, I'm not seeing that. So I was looking for ways in which we could accommodate, because they will not be able to review the documents, and especially if we're talking about hybrid representations. I'd be curious if anyone else has been able to accommodate.
Yeah, I think I would just add, I think a lot of what you would do would be the same things you would do in person, depending on what specific needs the client had. If you're talking about somebody with low reading proficiency or somebody who's illiterate, I think just making sure that you are reading the documents out loud to them, maybe even still sharing the screen to show them what you're reading. A reminder that documents, they just need a lot of like retainer agreements and stuff like that. They just need to sign with an X. They don't, need to sign their whole name. They just need to acknowledge, that it was read to. That might be different in different jurisdictions, but just I think looking to the same things that you would bring to an in-person meeting. I think this goes back to earlier points we made that nothing should be missing from a meeting just because it's virtual versus in person. And if you're not able to accomplish that virtually, then it's not a client you should be representing in that format. So if there's things that you can't do to make sure the client has what they need, then reconsider. But certainly, if the client is deaf, for example, you could have a sign language interpreter on a Zoom. And so I don't have any specific, tricks beyond that, but I think it's a good space to be creative and make sure that clients are being properly served.
Great. And another question is for Sarah, what are some of the biggest challenges for engaging pro bono lawyers with remote work, and how do you overcome these challenges? Such as oversight, supervision. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Sure. I mean, our pro bono program, we're not in the same office as the pro bono attorneys anyway. So things like oversight and supervision, again, really look the same whether the client and attorney are meeting virtually or in person. I think we're still asking the pro bono attorneys to send us questions. We're still reviewing documents before they're submitted. We're still available to troubleshoot. I think issues we've run into is a lot of the stuff we talked about earlier, identifying the right clients for this, making sure we're being really thoughtful in our intakes and are connecting clients who can be served that way, making sure that the attorneys have the tools and resources they need to be successful. So trainings like this, other one-pagers or information trainings on trauma-informed care to make sure that the attorneys we're working with know how to approach these meetings. But I would say, to go back to the top of this training, the virtual space has really allowed us to expand our pro bono work and I think reach more clients. So overall, from my perspective, it's been a big benefit to our program, at least.
Great. And any tips for working with family groups or multiple clients in one meeting while remote?
Getting everyone on camera. I mean, ideally, yes, you would have everyone there present at once. And I mean, if it's just a couple people, you can certainly fit them in one camera, but I've definitely seen situations where the individual is in another location and they're all dialing in at once.
So I actually, yes, having them all there, but also assuming that their stories are different, right? It's okay, I think, to talk to them individually, to try to just minimize the distractions and the amount of time that they're all trying to listen and stuff. I think it's important, and I think it's okay to talk to them individually, and at the same time, just however the family dynamic is and whatever is easier for them. And you also may want to hear what one of them has to say alone, and try to get that privacy with that particular person.
Yeah, making sure that they understand that being virtual doesn't sort of get them off the hook for all being at meetings. If that's what you need, if it's a meeting where you're expecting the whole family to be there, that they have to understand that one of them can't cover it, which I think is expectation setting to do earlier, just to echo what everybody else has said.
I had a case early on in the pandemic when courts had first started to go virtual on the state courts in Virginia. And it was a custody SIJ case, special immigrant juvenile status. And both the petitioner and the minor child had called in. And I was like, oh, that's so strange. Aren't you two together? And they were like, oh, no, we're not together. And I was like, oh, no, please don't let this judge ask if they're in the same spot. And it all worked out fine, and the judge was great. But it's just funny because there are just so many moving parts that you forget something of, like, you should probably be in the same area when we have court so that you can both speak and hear each other and not talk over each other. But yeah. And how do you handle clients that schedule, we talked about this a little bit, clients that schedule a virtual meeting but fail to log in or call without any notice, kind of repeatedly, kind of repeat offenders, if you will?
So I think that refers to my point a little bit about not physically being in your office and seeing, like the name of the firm and the professional space and not going to court. I think there's a lesser sense of urgency about their case. And so we had a client who was just like, oh, he literally told me twice, I'm at a party. Oh, yeah, I can't make it. I'm at a party. And I'm like, this is really important. Like, this is very important. And so it happens. It happens where they just kind of don't give it the importance, I think. And it could be just kids are kids, but sometimes I feel that the disconnect that we've had from the spaces that they would naturally see, the judge, the offices, I think that lends itself to not taking something maybe or giving it the importance that it needs. So in that case, we just had a really serious conversation about our services, their case, how important this was. And it's okay. I think the virtual space may be a little bit less formal, I think. And so I understand them sort of feeling that. But I think that most of our clients, if you really explain to them how serious this is, how important it is, how it really deserves and merits their attention, our attention, we sort of recalibrate. And he was in here. He actually came into the office. So and sometimes you need to just maybe bring them into the office, and that's what they need. So yeah.
Great. And thank you so much to our panelists, Karina Ramos, Sarah Burrows, and Michelle Jacobson. Thank you for sharing your expertise and insight today. And on behalf of the ABA, I'm Emily McCabe, thanking you all for joining us. And before leaving, please wait for the evaluation to come up on your screen. And I will now turn it over to Donna for some additional information. Thank you.
Sorry about that. My muted. On behalf of the American Bar Association and the ABA Commission on Immigration, thank you for participating in this program. To learn more about our sponsors, visit the ABA website at www.americanbar.org. Thank you, and please click on the evaluation link. We value your feedback. For those of you who want CLE credit, please click on the link now appearing on your screen. This will open the program evaluation, and after you submit the evaluation, the attendance confirmation and request for CLE credit will appear. Please complete the information requested. Excuse me. Please complete the information requested. Your information will be verified, and if your information meets all the attendance requirements for CLE credit, your certificates will be emailed to you. Thank you very much. This concludes our program.